In my previous video, How to Ground Your Reader in Your Scenes, I talked about the beginning of your scenes, what you need to include up front to ground your reader, things like where they are, who is present, and how much time has passed. But that's just the first part of your scene. There's plenty left to write. So today I want to talk about what makes a compelling scene, the middle. After you've grounded your reader in your scene, it's time to get busy and get to the meat of your story, to really transport your reader to that world. That's where the middle of your scene comes in. This is the place where you use all of those amazing writing techniques you've been working on, like character development, conflict, plot, dialogue, description. All of those elements come into play right here in the middle. But in order to keep your middle compelling and interesting so a reader wants to keep reading, we need to stay focused, make sure we have tension and conflict, and ask ourselves what could be worse. Often, we find the best version of the middle of our scenes in revision. So if you hang on until the end of this video, I'll tell you where you can get a free revision checklist that'll help you revise these scenes to do this. This is Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers. Because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and author. Let's start with staying focused on your scene's purpose. Each scene needs to have a purpose. This could be to reveal a new facet of your character, to up the stakes, to show new information, or in some other way advance your plot. Once you know what that scene's purpose is, you want to stay focused on it for the middle of your scene. For example, if the purpose of your scene is to show your character's relationship and the disagreements they have with their parent, you don't also want them to be arguing with their significant other and a police officer and their boss all in the same scene. Then you have lost your focus. You can tackle those other relationships in later scenes. Similarly, you want to get to that disagreement as soon as possible, because that's where the tension and the fast pace of your story lie. If your scene's purpose is to show your character disagreeing with their parent, we don't want to spend half of the scene describing every room in the house. That's not coming into play right now. We might also not want to describe their relationship with their other parent or their step-parent or their grandparent, unless that is going to directly affect what is about to happen in this scene. Those things belong in other scenes, or maybe not in the story at all. We need to stay focused and get to the purpose of the scene as soon as possible. That's the point in the scene, after all. When people talk about tightening your prose or being concise, this is what they mean. They mean not going off on tangents, not providing a bunch of unnecessary details, but staying focused on what you're trying to convey. So staying focused is tip 1 for writing compelling middles. Tip 2 is tension keeps readers invested in scenes. A focused scene isn't enough to hold a reader's interest. What's happening in the scene also needs to be interesting. Basically, it can't be boring. If you make your reader feel some emotion other than boredom or confusion, that is where your tension is going to start being created. They could feel anything. They could feel excited, worried, nervous, fearful, any emotion you like, other than boredom. Now, that tension also comes from the stakes of your story and your character's motivation. Your character should want something or not want something to happen in every scene. There should be some sort of a motivation. This can be the same or different from a previous scene. Your character might have an overall motivation for the story, but in an individual scene, they have a slightly different one. For example, maybe the character's motivation for the whole story is to get the girl, but in this one scene, they just finished football practice and they're really hungry. So their motivation for this scene is just to get something to eat. That motivation is going to drive tension because that's where the stakes are. The stakes are, does the character get what they want? Now, in order to up that tension and keep your scene interesting, we got to throw some things in the way. We got to make it hard for your character to get what they want. For example, let's say we have a character who really wants to be a singer. They love singing, and there's this band audition that they really want to go to. We might make it harder for them to get there by having their boss not want to give them any more time off. Or maybe this character has really bad stage fright, and even though they love to sing, they're struggling with that. Well, now we have made it more difficult for them to achieve what they want to. In this scene, we might show them having to confront that conflict and overcome it. By making it challenging for your character to achieve their goals, you create tension, because what you're saying is they might not succeed. If it's too easy, we know for sure the character is going to do it. They're going to get what they want. There's no tension. We're not wondering what's going to happen. Are they going to achieve this thing? We know because it's easy. If we make it hard, your reader doesn't know. So that's where your tension comes from. It comes from your characters wanting something possibly being in their way, making it hard for them to achieve that, and it comes from the stakes. So what are they risking to achieve their desire? As the story progresses, those stakes should get higher. So maybe at first they're risking something simple like a penny. By the end of the story, they're risking everything they own. So tip 1 is focus, tip 2 is tension, tip 3 is conflict keeps scenes interesting. We've already started talking about conflict, but notice from that singer example, I provided 2 different types of conflict. The first one, where the boss might not let them go, that is external conflict. The character is at odds with something outside of themselves. Stage fright is an example of internal conflict. There's something within the character that is holding them back. These are the 2 major types of conflict, and most long stories have both types in there somewhere. You can also mix them together. Now, when I say conflict, I mean there is a force working against your character. Another thing that can be in your character's way is what we call an obstacle. An obstacle is something that is simply in the way. It's not a force actively acting against them. It's just existing and happens to be in the way. So for example, if my characters get run off the road by another driver, that's a conflict because the other driver is actively acting against them. If my characters have to drive off the road because there's a boulder in the road, that's an obstacle. The boulder is not actively acting against them, it's just in the way. What these conflicts and obstacles do is they force your character to make a decision. They force them to actively participate in the story. That is where character growth is going to come from. That is where your plot is going to come from. A scene, the meat of a scene, should focus on what that conflict or obstacle is, how your character reacts to it, and what the consequences of their choices are. Now, you might not fit all 3 of those into every scene. One scene might focus on the obstacle, the next scene might focus on the consequences. And if you want to make your scenes extra interesting, to make sure you have conflict, obstacles, challenges for your characters, ask yourself what could be worse. As you're writing your story, it's really easy to make it too easy for your characters because as authors, we love them. They're real people to us. We want good things for them. But that's not very interesting to read. We basically need to make them earn their happiness. We do that by presenting conflicts and obstacles for them to overcome. For example, say I have a detective and they are trying to piece together evidence to solve a case. Maybe they end up needing to get a court order and search a suspect's car. Well, if I'm going to break that into 3 scenes, and I want to make each one worse. In the first scene where they are looking at the evidence, maybe a key piece is missing. Maybe they need to find that piece. Maybe it's missing from evidence. Maybe someone else has it and they have to go and get it. But I made it harder for them to piece together the information. Then, when they have to go get a court order to search the car, maybe that judge is the ex they really don't want to talk to. That's going to make that scene harder for them, and it's going to make it interesting. In the third scene, maybe it took them too long to get the court order, and the suspect has already had their car detailed, so most of the evidence is lost. Those are all ways that I can make it more difficult for my character to reach their goals. I can add conflict and tension. I've asked what could be worse. When I do this, what I'm doing is I'm raising the stakes and increasing the tension, because the harder it is for your character to achieve what they want, the less likely they are to be successful. When it's harder and they're less likely to succeed, you have more tension, and the threat to the stakes is higher. Next, I want to share an editor and author's thoughts on scene middles. Now that you know you need to make your characters squirm a little bit in order to keep your scene middles interesting, I want to give you one other tip, which is to show, don't tell. The middle of your scene is your meat. That's where the most important points lie. That is the part of your story that should really read more like a play-by-play action sequence and less like a report or a summary. This should be fully in scene, in the moment, as if it's happening right in front of your reader's eyes. This is where you want to spend your time. The longer you can sit in that scene and keep the tension high, the more likely your reader is to keep reading, and the faster the pace of your story will feel. I do have 2 videos that talk about how to do this. I have one video that is scene versus summary, when to put things in scene in that play-by-play, and when to summarize them. And another one which is how to show, don't tell in creative writing. Both of these have examples of what it means to show and what it means to tell, and why you might pick one over the other. If you have chosen something for your scene's middle, it's the focus, it's the purpose of your scene, that should probably be shown. Now that we've talked about all these different elements that make a compelling scene middle, I want to remind you that it doesn't all happen in the first draft. The one thing that you should train yourself to do when you're drafting is to ask yourself what could be worse, to make sure your scenes are hard for your characters, so they're forced to grow, the plot happens, and they earn that happy ending if they're going to get one. The other elements of a compelling middle might start in your draft, but you're going to really develop them in revision. So you might narrow your focus and cut out the tangents in revision. And you might up the tension by increasing the stakes or making it harder in revision. Writing a captivating scene middle is going to require both asking yourself things like what could be worse when drafting and having the discipline to fully revise your stories. So how do you keep your scenes interesting? Share your processes in the comments below. And for more videos on scenes and other aspects of writing, subscribe to Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers, because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and author. You can find out more about me at www.ignitedinkwriting.com. That's where you will find that revision checklist that will help you with your scenes. I've also linked to it in the show notes below. And if you want to check out how I approach writing compelling middles in my stories, you will find my book, When Magic Calls, at caitlinburvey.com. It's available in ebook, paperback, and audiobook formats. And now it's your turn to take a look at your scene middles. Make sure you are staying focused, that you know what your purpose is. Make sure you have created tension through conflict and obstacles, and that you are showing in the middle instead of telling to ignite your ink.